Most people fall well short of the fiber recommendation. What's your fiber elevator pitch today? How do you make a case for fiber?
Epidemiologically, it's the most solid data we've got, that the more you have of it, the lower your risk of virtually every disease that's been measured. And there doesn't seem to be an upper limit, so that it seems to be incremental, that for every 5 grams extra fiber you're getting, you can reduce your early mortality from heart disease or strokes by somewhere between 5 and 11%. And that just keeps going up as you increase that dose. And you can get similar studies showing the same for cancer, for mental health disease, across the board, autoimmune diseases. It seems to be really consistent. And you don't get that with any other macronutrients. You certainly don't get it with things like protein. There's no evidence of anything similar. So of all the things to focus on, I would say it is the most important. And fiber, it's been used in a very crude way, and we don't really know whether artificial fiber has the same effect as natural fiber. Most of the studies are based on natural fibers, but it's probably the variety of fibers that's important as well, and the fact that there's a correlation between the total fiber intake and the fact that your gut microbes are getting subjected to a vast range of different fibers, so that they've got more to eat, more variety to eat, more chemicals to use and synthesize, and then that means they can produce more of their postbiotic metabolites. So that, it's really convincing, and that's why our sort of number one focus is getting people to eat a target of 30 plants a week. That naturally gives them the fiber, but it also focuses people's minds on diversity rather than exclusion diets and fussy diets.
You mentioned the relationship between fiber intake and cancer there. Is it thought that fiber, through its effect on the microbiome and then some of these chemicals that you were talking about, is directly affecting the risk of certain cancers?
I would say that there's no great consensus on this at the moment, and a lot of what I'm reading is the latest thoughts that haven't necessarily made it through to all the literature. But my thoughts are that fiber is having its main effect by telling the gut microbes to produce short-chain fatty acids and other products, which then help the immune system. So we're learning the immune system is key to cancers and aging, and that the main interface with our environment and the immune system is our gut microbes. So it's like everything in medicine, it just gets more complicated. But the key is that if our immune system is working really well and activated and flexible, it can seek out early cancers, kill them off before they get going. And this happens every day in our bodies. If that immune system is not distracted by other things, it's not distracted by inflammation or junk food or anything else, and it's got really good supplies coming to it from the microbiome and all the right signals, then that's the way it seems to fight cancer. And that evidence also comes from its benefits for chemotherapy and immunotherapy in fighting cancers once you've got the cancer. The more fiber you're eating, the healthier your gut microbes. And we did a study on melanoma of this. It really shows that it's the most important factor in your survival. So whether it's prevention or it's treatment, fiber seems to be acting through the immune system. I think most people are seeing it nowadays.
Is that the same mechanism by which fermented foods affect the immune system? And are fermented foods a replacement for fiber, or should be seen as something that's additional to?
I think we learned a lot about this from a study from the Stanford group. Christopher Gardner's and Justin Sonnenberg did a study about 3 or 4 years ago where they took 28 men, gave one group a high fiber diet, and I think it was the same group and they crossed over, but high fiber group, and the other had 5 fermented foods a day. They did like daily blood tests for a whole range of immune proteins and inflammation, and they showed very different effects in the 2 groups. So both of them improved gut microbe health, but the fermented food group seemed to do it by a 25% reduction in the immune markers. So they were suppressing inflammation. what this tells me is they're working in different ways. And that's what the authors also concluded. So I think my view is that fermented food doesn't work in the way we used to think it worked, which was by engrafting those live microbes in the food in your gut, because they would be overwhelmed. If you think about, there are maybe a few billion microbes in fermented food. Some of them get killed off as they go through the stomach, and then they hit the lower colon, will be surrounded by trillions. So there'll be like one guy in a football stadium trying to shout and get himself heard. It's not going to happen. So more likely is their effect is higher up in the gut, where they can have a real voice. And most people that I'm speaking to, my colleagues, think it's in the small intestine, and they are impacting the immune cells in the small intestine and tickling those. And this is, I think, the current theory of how most of fermented foods are working is by directly affecting the immune system, calming it down, and that leads to this reduction in these inflammatory markers. And so you've got to remember the gut is this giant sensing system for the body and the brain, and anything you can send down its way to calm it down is going to have a positive effect on the body. And I think this is how, for some unknown reason, these microbes in fermented food seem to have this great effect on our bodies. We don't quite know why, and we don't quite know exactly how they work, but that's the current theory, which sort of makes sense. So that you need to have both fiber and fermented foods really to have this complementary system. Both have their own good effects.
Do you have a favorite fermented food or any tips for people that are buying fermented foods?
Well, my favorite fermented food is cheese, because I've always loved cheese, and that was one reason I only lasted 6 weeks as a vegan. I just love cheese too much. Sorry, cows, but couldn't stop it. But I'm now pretty addicted to my kimchi. And when I was writing my book, I did a survey of about 70 fermented food and drink products, and we sequenced them in our lab. Surprisingly, most of them have large numbers of microbes in them, and even things that you wouldn't have thought of as particularly helpful. So I think the one that surprised most people is Kraft cream cheese. So Philadelphia cream cheese, the commonest global make. You thought that would be completely fake, but actually it's got 3 or 4 really clear strains of dairy-loving microbes in it, and that's why it eventually does go blue and moldy in your fridge, as opposed to Kraft cheese slices, which are, I think, totally synthetic and have no microbes on them at all, never go moldy. So most of these ones were really good, and we had some with over 50 different microbial species in them, which you just got to think, compared to the average probiotic, that's pretty cool. You're getting that. It's also tasty and nice. It's not just taking a tablet. So I want to encourage people to have at least 3 portions, small portions a day, which I think is a pragmatic way of getting enough ferments in tastes that they like, and they can decide what they have. But yogurt's good, kefir's good. The coconut kefirs I've tasted are fantastic, and they also we tested some of them, and they've got plenty of probiotic microbes in them. You can make a fantastic beetroot krauts, which is one of my favorite ones. You transform the beetroot into a really different taste, and it's really exciting. And then, of course, I've transformed. I don't no longer use standard stock cubes, which are highly processed, and I make my own miso now. And I have a big tub of that, and that is, it's a fermented product, super healthy, and I use that instead of stock for all my foods. So, I'm always looking for something new and interesting, but I vary it. And I think, just try 3 different ones in a day and see what suits you. And, there's some great kombuchas out there. And a lot of the stuff we tested in the stores were still pretty good. Some of the store-bought kimchis and krauts, the kefirs, they all had microbes in them. The only tricky ones are things like kombuchas in cans. And the only way you can keep a kombucha in a can is to filter out the microbes, have it so it's like vinegar, and you've killed off the microbes because they've got no more sugar left. And then you add artificial sweeteners. Or you pasteurize them. So they're no longer live. And so they're not going to explode in your face or blow up in the store. So that's a slight problem, which I thought would have no benefit at all until the latest research has come out on postbiotics, which clearly shows with numerous studies that pasteurized microbes in many situations are healthy. And this has really changed my whole view of this whole field. I was ready to say, never have if it's pasteurized, forget it, it's rubbish. But if it tastes good, it may still have some benefits. And I think a lot of the stuff you can buy in stores is still pretty good. We need to do a little bit more research on postbiotics, but I think there's enough evidence that they are doing some good. And I think we're going to see more and more of these dead microbes in food because it's a lot easier for food manufacturers to put something that can't replicate and can't explode into food, and we can get those benefits. And they probably work on the immune system as well. And the way I look at it is, because it was rather strange, people say, how can it possibly work if it's dead? Well, I think the most likely is that it's the fragments of the cell wall of these microbes have proteins in them, and probably as you're ingesting them, they might tickle some immune cells in your gut and stimulate them again to relax and calm down. In a similar way that dead vaccines work as well. We always take polio vaccines and things we drink, they're dead, but they still have an effect on us. And so we need to keep more of an open mind on how these very old products are actually working.
I've heard some people describe them as ghost biotics.
I prefer zombie biotics. I think
zombie biotics. And that gets me thinking about sourdough and tempeh, other foods where there's probably deactivated or dead microbes.
Yeah, exactly. If you cooked it in the oven, 200 degrees centigrade for an hour. So all of these things could be useful. And, it's even got some of the beer manufacturers tell us that if they got a little residue, and Guinness was one of the ones to start saying, oh, yes, maybe that bit of yeast, dead yeast at the bottom, still have some health benefits. So I think we're going to be definitely seeing more in this whole area, definitely a boom area.
We might see a beer company come out and run an intervention with your new rating system to see if their beer improves the score.
Well, that's right. At least they'd have a fighting chance now of seeing some benefit. So you just got to, someone did do this before. They added fibre to beer, but they had to withdraw it because people were actually getting full and drinking less beer. So if fibre doesn't work, maybe a few dead microbes will work. So that'll be interesting.
One thing I've been thinking about more lately as I get older is brain health, staying sharp, maintaining focus, and protecting cognitive function long term. My days involve constantly shifting between screens, emails, social media, phone calls, recording podcasts. All of this requires a lot of cognitive processing power and cognitive reserve. And there are stretches where I feel absolutely dialed in. And there are other times where the fog creeps in. And what I've come to appreciate is that there are biomarkers that you can measure that act as a window into your brain health. Things like inflammation, blood sugar regulation, nutrient levels, and hormonal health all influence how your brain performs today and over time. If we're not measuring those systems, we're making assumptions that what we're doing is working. That's one of the reasons I use Function. It gives you over 160 lab tests each year so you can see what's happening beneath the surface. For me, tracking things like inflammatory markers and markers of metabolic health like triglycerides and HbA1c has directly informed how I train, how I eat, and how I recover. Rather than just doing things blindly, I have data to help guide the lifestyle choices that I'm making and where I may or may not need to pay more attention. Own your health for $365 a year. That's $1 a day. Learn more and join using my link, functionhealth.com/Simon Hill, and use the gift code Simon25 for a $25 credit towards your membership.